Hey Carrie, I figured that I'd want to explain the rules to Talisman a bit before we ever decided to play our own game, because I'd love to play with the expansions with you. So, the way that Talisman works is that the simple objective is to reach the crown of command space that's right there in the middle, and you need a talisman in order to do so. While it's simple as far as objective goes, it's the ways that you get there that's a little bit more difficult. In total, there are 14 different characters that you can pick from. These are just an example of some of the characters that you can select. Each one has their own set of abilities and stats. Each character that has their card has strength and craft, which is the stats that I was referencing earlier. Strength is generally used for battle. Craft is like a representation of knowledge, and it fights a different kind of enemy, as well as becomes important when it comes to spells. Each character also has their own starting location, which are on the card. It said the tavern, so that's why I have the warrior over here. Starting locations don't generally offer any initial gain into the game, but it's about position that makes it very useful, especially when you start including the other expansions. So, the way that it works is that you move around the board and you start drawing adventure cards that have backs like this. There are 6 different kinds of adventure cards. You have strangers, which are kind that generally offer you stat boosts and different opportunities to progress. You have objects, which are things that you're trying to collect that can help you pretty significantly. There's followers, which are people who join your party and help you along the way. There's enemies that you're trying to fight, so that way you can gain stats. There's places, which not only offer stats, but are generally more permanent that you can reuse over and over again. With the spaces and the board in general, they each have their own card carrying limit. Most of the spaces can only have one card actively face up, but spaces like the Oasis and the Ruins can have 2 cards, and the Hidden Valley at the far end can have up to 3 cards active that are face up. So for example, if we had the fields over here, and the marsh is what we drew, that means that no more cards can be put inside of that field space, and that marsh, based on what the card says, is permanently there for the rest of the game. Not only do we have that, but the biggest one that we have is the events. Now the events, generally, are either going to be region-based, or they affect the entire board and all the players that are in it. So the regions break up into 3 different ways. From this plane space, all the way around the outside, is the outer region. From the Oasis here, all the way around to right here, is the middle region, and the crown of command space, with everything that surrounds it, is the inner region. The region-based events generally only affect that region and no other region. So for example, if we had an event that caused everybody to lose their turn that was in that specific region, that means if the card was drawn here, it only affects everybody in this outer region. It doesn't affect anybody in the inner region, or the middle region. Or if it was drawn in the inner region, it doesn't affect anybody outwards, and vice versa. So one of the currencies of Talisman that becomes pretty important when it comes to interactions with the different locations or enemies is Fate here. And Fate is generally used as a mechanic in order to re-roll. But the way that it works is once you spend Fate to re-roll, you have to accept what you roll from that point onward. It generally is used for attack rolls, interacting with spaces, or you can even use it for movement rolls if you don't like what you rolled. Now when it comes to fighting enemies, if we're here and we're going to fight the ogre, the way that it works is that you have your base stats. So the warrior here has a base strength of 4, and you add any modifiers to that in total, basically encompassing things like weapons or magic objects. Sometimes certain spells will give you strength boosts during battle, and all that is added together on top of whatever your die roll is. And then you can have another person with the way the enemies work is that they also have their own strengths. The ogre here has a strength of 5. And here's a strength of 6. And here's a roll of 6. So this total attack score is of 11. And this is a total attack score of 9. Assuming that I had won this case, which I didn't, I would lose a life because I lost. But if I had won, I would simply take the card off the board, and that ogre is now my trophy. The way that trophies work is that enemies generally range can be anywhere as low as 2 strength, or they can even go as high as like 7 strength, or maybe even higher as we go into different expansions. But for every multiple of 7 that you have, whether it be strength or craft, you can cash in that amount of trophies and gain strength and craft in order to boost yourself up. It becomes more important on the craft side because the more craft you have, the more spells you can carry. The way that it works is that spells, you have to have a minimum of 3 craft in order to carry 1 spell. When you get up to 5 craft, you can carry 2 spells. And then when you get to 6 craft or more, that's when you can carry 3 spells at a time and use them as you see fit. The way that spells work, they'll have backs like this. Generally, the spells will have the instructions on when you can cast them and how they work. But these are cards that you want to keep for yourself. You don't want to let any other players see. Only real exception to this is characters like the Prophetess, who can look at other players' spells. But other than that, you keep them mostly to yourself. So that way you can keep in your own mind when you want to cast the spells. And you can look at the spells over and over. Every character, when you start the game, is going to start with a piece of gold. In some expansions, it's going to be more than 1 piece of gold. And that becomes important when you go to areas like the village, where you can buy items that help you. There's also other cards in the adventure deck that allow you to buy different items that aren't offered in the village, in which gold becomes important for you to use there. The next other portion is how to get to the middle region. So if we're out here in the outer region, there's a multiple ways that we can get to the middle region. From the tavern, if we roll a 6, there's a boatman that can ferry us across to the temple here. If we have an axe in our inventory, we can use any wood space or that forest space over there, build a raft and cross, or we can get over to that sentinel bridge over there, fight a sentinel who has a strength of 8, and try to beat him in order to cross. When we're inside of the middle region, as we're operating, there's, of course, a different variety of different spaces, but our goal is still to try to get a talisman. There's 2 ways that you can get it. Sometimes in the adventure deck, talismans will show up, but the other way to get it is right here at this space, known as the Warlock's Cave, and it has its own little chart that you can roll in order to decide what your quest is going to be. As long as your quest is active, you can't pass the portal of power on the opposite side, which is the only way to enter into the inner region. But once you complete your Warlock's quest, you can move back to the Warlock's Cave, and then you get to pick up a talisman from there. Once you're inside, once we made it all the way into the inner region, we no longer have the ability to roll dice. You can only move one space at a time, whether it's towards the direction of the crypt if you're strength based, which is the better way to go, or if you're craft based, going towards the mines. The other mechanic is that all characters have an alignment of some kind. There are 3 kinds. The warrior here is neutral, but there's also good and evil characters. This becomes important for things like the chapel and the graveyard, which the graveyard, if you're evil, allows you to replenish all your fate for free, but you lose a life if you're good. And if you go to the chapel, if you're good, then you're able to replenish all your health for free, and evil characters lose lives. There's also certain objects and events that benefit good and evil characters, so you want to definitely keep that in mind, as far as not just in the character that you pick and whatever abilities they have, but whatever alignment that they have too, to work that to your advantage. Sometimes, when those alignments do get changed, you have these cards. Right now, this one's on the good side, so if my warrior got turned good, I place the card like this. If he got turned evil, I place the card like this. And that's just the way that I can mark it to remind myself that he's not neutral. Sometimes, through circumstances of spells or the enchantress over here, there's an opportunity to where my character can be turned into a toad. And what happens is, when he's turned into a toad, I have this little toad card that goes right here. That's my new stat card. And the reason you don't want to be turned into a toad is because you would lose all your objects, all your followers, and all your gold. So that's definitely something that you do not want to do. In addition to that, your character comes off the board, and you get a little toad piece that replaces your character. And while you're a toad that lasts for 3 turns, you can only move 1 space at a time in either direction. Once you turn back into a regular player, the toad comes off, the warrior comes back on. You can remove the toad card and have your character back, but all of your gold and objects and followers that you lost when you turn into a toad, you don't get those back immediately. Every character that has a carrying limit of 4 items, but there are things like the mule here who can help extend your carrying limit. So if you want to carry a lot of objects, you'll want to find the mule so that way you can extend it even further. When you have too many objects and you can't carry them all, you have to ditch one of them to keep it to your carrying limit of 4. So let's say I had a lot of good items, but I can't carry them all. So maybe the armor might not be something that's useful to me because I have better objects. I have to drop it on my space, but also realize that the objects that you ditch can also be taken by other players if they land on it. I believe that covers everything